So thank you everyone for coming, joining us today. My name is Mark Romeo. I'm the event and programs manager at AIA Los Angeles. This is the first of four virtual seminars that we are doing with SoCal Edison. Our next seminar will be September 12th at noon. Again, that is 2022 Codebreaker, Embodied Carbon, and Cal Green. And the third one will be on October 16th from 12 to 1 p.m. That's Codebreaker, solar battery, and zero net carbon design, the 2022 energy code. We're still working out a date for our fourth seminar in the series, so keep your eye out for, on our calendar and in our newsletter. So I would like to introduce Dave Intner. He is an AIA member. He is an architect and decarbonization specialist with Southern California Edison. Dave's been doing this for a few years with AIA-LA, and we're excited to have today's seminar. We're going to be recording this. It's recording now. So this will be put on our YouTube page if you'd like to revisit, or if you know anyone who was unable to make it, you can let them know to check out our YouTube page in a couple days. If everyone could just please mute themselves. And I believe Dave will be taking questions at the end, but if anyone has a question, just type it into the chat and I'll try to flag Dave down and get that question to him. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Intner.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we're really glad to kick off this series with AIA LA for the year, looking at topics around decarbonization and energy codes. My role with Southern California Edison is in the Codes and Standards group, doing education and outreach and a number of other activities around the code development process, what's in the various energy and sustainability codes, and just supporting industry in general. So as part of that, with the codes and a lot of regulations moving increasingly towards supporting electrification as part of the state's clean energy goals, a lot of questions come up. And the latest code, the 2022 standards, really up to the game as far as electrification readiness and things like heat pumps, which we'll talk about in prescriptive baselines. So these technologies are increasingly becoming more prevalent in your projects, and clients may have questions about them that sometimes you're not quite sure how to answer. And so this material today is hopefully going to help arm you with some good information and facts to support your work and your projects and your discussions with clients, and just better understanding the decision-making process around the selection of these technologies. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the screen share. Hopefully you can see a blank white screen, and I can go ahead and kick it off here with our fun little animation that they do to start these code breakers. The idea with the code breakers is that they are bite-sized kind of lunch and learn style micro learnings that give you a pretty good dive into a subtopic of a major area of the code in the space of an hour or thereabouts. Energy Code Ace has a whole host of trainings online. Some are half day, some are multi-day, and they get into much more depth and comprehensiveness on various topics, especially our architect focused classes. We have some for non-res architects, single family architect topics. Encourage you to check all those out. But today we're going to be talking specifically about electrification and communicating about electrification and talking with your clients about electrification. So this is an AIA approved course. The AIA Los Angeles will be doing the reporting once you've completed today's session, and then that will show up in your transcript. We'll also be sending out after the fact a zero net carbon design CEU certificate that you can hold on to in case you get audited by the state to demonstrate that you've completed 5 units within your 2-year cycle of relicensure. Because there is a five unit requirement for zero net carbon design, and this covering an electrification and clean energy topic exclusively does fall in that category. So make sure you stay for the whole thing because Mark will keep an eye on that. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? We will be summarizing some of the key facts around heat pumps and the other electric technologies about their performance, cost questions, and how they interact with the grid in California. We're going to be looking at the specific energy code requirements for both electric and gas appliances. We're going to explore the differences between all electric designs and mixed fuel project designs in terms of energy code compliance and potential impact on construction and operation costs. Have some analysis in there to help you understand how that might impact your projects and your clients. And then finally, we'll give you a bunch of sources of information on how to access different websites and other resources that provide you guidance for incentive programs, its rebates, technical information, and others supporting deployment of these technologies. The key resource that I want to make sure you take away with you is Energy Code ACE. That's a statewide program that supports industry with various tools, training, and resources around the energy code. So definitely one you want to bookmark for sure. Tools include things like the reference ACE, which is an online version of the code, the image ACE, which shows pictures of code compliant installations for various things, the virtual compliance assistant, which helps to generate compliance forms for non-residential HVAC systems, and a whole bunch of other really helpful tools. Training, we do in online instructor-led courses, as well as some pre-recorded self-study that are available on various topics. And after today's seminar, I hope that you'll run to the website, look at the course offerings for what most interests you, and sign up for some of the remaining sessions throughout this year. We're going to have a really robust set of trainings coming out beginning of next year that's going to be handling what's coming in the next code cycle, the 2025 standards. Everything we're talking about today relates specifically to the 2022 code, which went into effect January 1st, 2023. So 3 years after that, January 1st, 2026, we'll have a whole new set of standards coming into effect. So the projects that you're starting to design next year may very well be subject to those, depending on how long it takes you to get those construction documents into the permit counter. And then finally, our resources. We're going to highlight some of those resources. The kind of most common one that gets used are the fact sheets, which try to take different topics within the code and break them down with graphics and organization to make that really dense, really thick PDF of the code a lot more accessible and much easier to find the specific information that you need. So we'll highlight some of those as we go, and I encourage you to download those fact sheets. All right, that's the website, energycodeace.com. So let's get into the topic today. And I encourage you as we go to put questions you have in the chat. We do our best to identify what some of the common questions are that come up, but if you have questions specific to things that your clients ask, things that you yourself are curious about, you read in the news and you don't know how true or relevant some of the claims are, and or just anything that I talk about in the material. If you have follow-up questions, just put it in the chat there and we'll do our best to address it. So we're going to talk about some of the common questions clients may bring up. What are the policy drivers that are bringing us to this kind of clean energy electric building design standard that is increasingly becoming the norm? And then what are the benefits? The reduced emissions, the health and safety advantages, etc. So let's see, sorry, make sure it's advancing. There we go. So some of the common questions we get, these are some of the things we're going to be addressing today. Will my experience be the same? What if the power goes out? Will I really be happy with these technologies? They're unfamiliar to me. I'm not sure. What's it going to cost, right? How's that going to impact that? And can the grid handle all this? So these are some of the key questions we'll be looking into today. Hopefully some of those are a little bit familiar, things you've heard of before or wondered yourself. So we'll start talking about those primarily, especially as it relates to the building code when we're talking about all electric buildings versus mixed fuel. we're looking at the core technologies that the code regulates. That's primarily going to be your heating and cooling systems, water heating systems, and to a lesser extent, cooking systems, not directly regulated in terms of the equipment type, although Title 20 has something to say about that. But certainly there's ventilation requirements around cooking, and the electric readiness provisions address cooking. But yeah, heat pumps are available for space heating, water heating, and even clothes drying. And those are technologies which um, the code is supporting the increased adoption of those. Um, the difference primarily in all electric home is going to include heat pumps, space, water, and appliances, heating for those. And then a mixed fuel home will have natural gas or propane gas typically for space heating, water heating, cooking, and clothes drying. Some other states, there may be other fuels like heating oil and that sort of thing, but generally in California, it's usually electric or gas. What are some of the policy drivers that are pushing us in this direction? So the Air Resources Board's 2022 scoping plan includes proposed phase outs of gas appliances by 2030, specifically for space and water heating. That would be for new appliance sales manufactured before that date. So there'll still be some lingering sales, but the writing is a bit on the wall as far as whether it's 2030 or somewhere thereafter. These types of appliances will be primarily sold as electric. Other types of policy drivers, the California Public Utilities Commission has eliminated, recently, it eliminated electric line extension subsidies for mixed fuel new construction buildings. So previously, there had been an allowance that got put into the electric rates that would be a amount of funds to a developer or a project site owner to extend electric service to their property. Um, that's been eliminated, so that full cost would fall to the building owner or developer to add any new infrastructure and not get put onto ratepayers unless it's an all electric building. Um, the that went into effect July of this year. And 1 year previously, the CPUC had eliminated all natural gas line extension subsidies of all kinds for new construction buildings, meaning that, again, if you're putting in a development and it's adding natural gas infrastructure to the system, the builder or developer is responsible for all costs up to the connection point. And none of that gets rate-based anymore. None of that gets spread out to um, ratepayers in general. And then finally, the 2022 Energy Code, as we talked about, it introduces heat pump HVAC and water heating requirements, primarily their prescriptive baselines, meaning that the default is that you would put in HVAC or water heating, depending on your climate zone and which was called for in that climate zone. And you could use the performance approach to do a different approach. And we'll look at an example of a mixed fuel versus an all electric building toward the end of the presentation. But even if you did put in gas appliances in your project, the code now requires electric readiness for new homes and multifamily dwellings and some commercial uses as well, even if natural gas is utilized for cooking, drying, space heating, and water heating. And the reason that this is having a positive impact on the climate is because the grid is increasingly, every about 2 to 3% every year, the grid adds more and more renewables as the makeup of the overall percentage of generation. The target is that by 2045, 100% of retail sales on the grid will be carbon neutral. We're already pushing 50% today in terms of the carbon neutral makeup. This chart kind of shows an interim, but the overall picture is that year over year, if you build a project electric today, it's only going to get increasingly cleaner as it draws electricity from the grid. And of course, if you have on-site solar or on-site solar and battery, that only improves the picture more because you're you're using electricity fully clean that you generate yourself on site. And this kind of demonstrates that the all electric building today is about half the emissions of a comparable mixed fuel building. You can kind of see that in the bar charts on the left, and that as we continue the grid getting cleaner and cleaner every year, it's projected to be better than 60% cleaner than a mixed fuel comparable building in 2030, and over 80% cleaner or more in 2050. So that's only going to continue as we march towards those carbon neutrality goals. So this is one of the fact sheets I was saying is a really useful one. This is the electric readiness fact sheet, and it breaks down all the different end uses and the specific requirements for clearances for future equipment, and the specific size of the different circuits, how to label the circuits, etc. So this takes that section of the code and kind of provides a bit of a helpful guide on how to interpret it. So I encourage you to download this from the Energy Code ACE website, um, the electric readiness fact sheet. But again, even if you're using gas, um, uh, gas end uses for clothes drying, cooking, space and water heating, you still have to have um, circuits and outlets at those future locations so that when that gas equipment fails down the road, and if the CARB regulations are successful in going into effect, at the end of the useful life of that equipment, there will only be an electric option. And even if there is a gas option, you want there to be an equal decision that the consumer could make between whether they put in gas or electric, that they wouldn't need to take on expensive upgrades, open up walls, add new lines, upgrade panels or what have you, that needs to be baked in, that they already have the readiness for that to just do a like for like swap, changing out gas to electric down the road if they choose to.
Excuse me, Dave, if I can just jump in.
Yes.
There was a question from Jorge. He was
Yeah.
asking about remodels when replacing HVAC or WH requires the electric ready receptacle.
Yeah. So electric readiness is only a provision at this time for new construction. So in the case of a remodel, if you're going to be replacing HVAC or water heating, um, there's nothing to say you can't do like for like right now. You would need to put in the minimally compliant equipment on a prescriptive basis. So say that you put in a gas furnace, it would need to meet the minimum efficiency requirements, as well as other things that might get triggered, like duct testing, if it's a ducted system, and other features that the code requires. But you would not be required in a like-for-like change-out to put in a heat pump, unless your jurisdiction might have adopted a REACH code, and you don't need to um, do electric readiness at that time because you're not really doing anything necessarily to the electric system. Now, is it a good idea if you are doing something else to the electric system and you're going to go ahead and say, you know what, while we're doing this, while we have the electrician on site, while they're adding circuits for this or that, or say that you're adding an EV charger, why not have them while they're out there upgrade the panel and do the other circuits as part of a larger job that gets it all done at once? So the code isn't necessarily going to require that you do that during a remodel situation, but it's a good idea to at least consider it and put it on the table. Hopefully that answered the question. Um, so increasingly, another driving factor besides the climate emissions is the indoor air quality and the other kind of chemical emissions that you get from combustion appliances. Um, there was a UCLA study that estimated replacing gas with electric appliances would prevent about 350 premature deaths per year in the state, and also produce 3.5 billion in annual health benefits from cleaner air. A big part of that is because a number of um, the chemical fumes from combustion, particularly nitrogen dioxides, they have been increasingly linked to increased incidence and exacerbation of pediatric asthma and other diseases such as COPD, There are carcinogens in things like benzene and formaldehyde that come off of the combustion of gas. So increasingly, there's a growing body of scientific knowledge that shows the linkage between burning these fuels in our homes and businesses in our indoor environments and the health impacts that result. There was a series of studies that looked at the correlation between the incidence of asthma and the presence of a gas stove in a home. And California was among the two highest states because we have the highest penetration of gas cooking among most states. Um, Nationwide, it was about 12% incidence of increased cases of pediatric asthma, but California was 20% because of that prevalence. Um, so just important to note, it's not just a climate thing, it's also understanding that it's a public health imperative as well. So quick little knowledge check question. What do you think? In an all-electric home meeting the 2022 Energy Code, which building systems must use electricity? And again, this is if it's an all-electric home in the 2022 Energy Code. So is it going to be a heat pump space heater, an induction or otherwise electric stovetop, a heat pump water heater, heat pump or electric clothes dryer, or all of these things? You can go ahead and put your answer in the chat and we'll see what people think. Which of these, if it's an all electric home? Yes, I'm seeing a lot of all of the above. In fact, I'm seeing exclusively all of the above. So very good. Very good. That's correct. It's all of these things if it's an all electric home. Now the code doesn't say that these if you're building a home, you don't have to put all of these things in. You can still put in gas end uses, but you would still have to provide infrastructure to support these appliances in the future being electric. Great. So we'll go ahead and jump into the next section that's looking at the equipment efficiencies themselves. So we're going to look at these different equipment and kind of how does this address some of the questions that come up with clients. So will my utility be higher by using more electricity? It's generally understood that on a unit energy basis, per unit of energy, if you normalize therms and kilowatt hours to BTUs, electricity is more expensive. However, because heat pumps are so much more efficient, they're 3 to 4 times as efficient as an equivalent gas appliance, you use far fewer units of electricity in the operation. So for instance, the minimum federal indoor gas furnace efficiency is 80%. Heat pumps have a coefficient of performance that's roughly around 3. Their actual coefficient of performance will vary based on ambient conditions. I'll explain that in a second, but because they're not converting a fuel from one type, like in the case of gas, it's converting chemical energy in that fuel into heat energy. A heat pump is literally pumping heat from one place to another. So it's using that refrigerant loop in a compressor cycle. So it compresses that refrigerant and then it expands it to release the heat. So you're kind of like using that refrigerant compression and expansion cycle like a sponge to suck up heat from one area, which depending on if you're in heating and cooling mode, it's either going to be from the indoors. If you're in cooling mode, you're absorbing heat from the inside and rejecting it to the outside. But looking at the bottom of this slide, that's in the heating mode, you're absorbing heat from the outdoor air and rejecting that heat to the inside of the space. Now, it may be snowing outside, it may feel cold to us, but there's still plenty of heat energy in that air. So cold to that refrigerant loop is very different than cold to what we feel and sense with our skin. So there's still plenty of heat. Now, if you're in a cold climate, there are special heat pumps that are cold climate heat pumps that are designed a bit differently in the way that their refrigerant cycle runs and how they're rated and defrost cycles and all that. So you want to make sure you're speccing the right equipment for the right application and the right climate zone and work with your mechanical engineers and your equipment suppliers to ensure that's happening. But that it's appropriate for all climate zones. And in the case of mini splits, which are ductless systems, you get even more efficiency because you're using that refrigerant directly as the medium to move the heat around. You're not then kind of heating up a mass of air that moves it around. And you can also zone areas more directly. So you can have multi-zones within a house and be conditioning different spaces to different temperatures, which tends to be very efficient versus blowing the same air all over the space in a ducted system to all the different zones, which tends to be less efficient. So yeah, heat pump HVAC systems, very, very efficient. And that's part of the reason that they can be so cost effective to own and operate. So similar principle with heat pump water heaters, using that refrigerant loop to um, absorb heat from the ambient air around the heater, whether that's the interior space, the garage, or maybe it's in a small shed in a mild climate outside of the main house. But that process is going to be much more efficient than a storage or even a tankless water heater, which even the condensing types top out at about 95% efficiency. Um, so yeah, same kind of principle. Again, even though you may think a unit of electricity costs more than a unit of gas, uh, you're using so many fewer units that it kind of comes out as a wash in terms of the overall cost of operation. And then the cooktop efficiencies. Gas cooktops are about 40% efficient. 60% of the energy from when you're cooking with gas goes right out into your kitchen. The flames licking up the side, heat coming up around, and then requiring more ventilation to kind of keep that out of your kitchen area. Electric resistance cooktops, so that's kind of the either the older coil type that glow or some of the more advanced ceramic type smooth top electric resistance, which are much nicer than the old coil types. But they're about 74% efficient, give or take. Induction cooktops are 90% efficient because rather than using like a radiant energy, they're using a magnetic field that gets generated by the coil underneath the cooktop surface. And that magnetic field is only providing energy when it senses a ferrous metal pan on top of the stove. So that's going to be cast iron, stainless steel, or a hybrid pan like that could be aluminum but with a stainless steel base or core. That's a very common type of induction compatible cookware. So what happens is that the cooking vessel itself, the pan itself, becomes effectively the burner. It becomes the heat source. That magnetic field excites the molecules in that pan, and it just cooks the food directly without having that kind of intermediary where you have to heat up an element or a burner first, and then that in turn heats the pan. So highly efficient. Also extremely precise control because as soon as you turn off that magnetic field, it stops heating immediately. You don't have any kind of a cool down happening. Excellent control, excellent precision. It's very safe. The surface right adjacent to that pan does not heat up. I've seen induction demonstrations where they're boiling water and they have like a magazine or a dollar bill underneath the pan between the cooking surface and the pan, and it's not combusting. And of course, we talked a bit about the eliminating the products of combustion from your house and how much safer that makes things. Here's a study that shows, there's virtually no uh, nitrogen dioxide emissions whatsoever. You'll still get some particulate, obviously, from the act of cooking, but in terms of the asthmagens present in nitrogen dioxide, as well as other nasty chemicals like benzene, formaldehyde, carbon monoxide, those things wouldn't be present when you're cooking with an electric cooktop. So indoor air quality is an important benefit of cooking electric. And then we don't talk too much about electric vehicles because you think of them as being, well, it's transportation, it's not buildings, but because the charging infrastructure really is building integrated in a lot of cases, particularly in residential. We do want to mention it. And of course, there's also Cal Green requirements for electric vehicle charging in multifamily. Um, so it's worth noting that electric vehicles are extremely efficient in terms of their use of energy. They transmit 65% of the energy directly to the wheels through their motors. Then they add another 22%, give or take, through regenerative braking. So nearly 90% of the energy that we put into an electric vehicle gets converted into road miles. Conversely, gas cars have so much heat losses from all of the combustion processes that they only convert about 16 to 25% of their energy directly into the wheels. Most of the rest goes out your exhaust pipe or your radiator. The other benefit that you'll see increasingly with electric vehicles is as a resiliency asset. And we talk about that in a little bit in terms of once the capability for bidirectional charging becomes more widespread, that's going to be something that we're going to see where electric vehicles become potentially a building and grid resiliency asset. All right, so the question here, and this isn't multiple choice, this is kind of open-ended. So what are your favorite benefits of heat pump and electric appliances? A, their efficiency. B, that when they're combined with on-site photovoltaic, they can reduce the utility cost. C, the indoor air quality is improved with electric appliances within the home. Or if you have something else that's been mentioned or that you know about or that you think is great about electric technologies, why don't you share that? So by all means, let's see what you got. Got an A and C, we got efficiency, health is a priority. Good, kind of everyone picking different things that Zaid, I see that you like the synergy between PV systems and all electric working together very efficiently. A little bit of all of the above. Lower carbon footprint. Thank you, William. That's great. Excellent. All good reasons that electric is a really helpful climate solution and health solution. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the reliability questions come up, as well as the interaction with the grid and the impact to the grid. So, is the electric grid going to be able to handle the added load? This comes up a lot. If we're using more electricity, can the capacity of the grid handle it? So, the key thing about the grid, and there's absolutely going to be grid impacts. No question, those are things that as grid planners, we're looking very much at the near and long-term effects of what this type of a clean energy technological transition is going to look like for our electricity delivery system. But the key thing to keep in mind is that the electric grid is typically designed to accommodate peak demand plus a margin. Now, peak demand is when we have the highest concentration of uses where the amount of kilowatt, real-time kW kilowatts being called for from all of our customers all over the grid, all over statewide across all the utilities. The grid needs to be able to handle that. It's a little bit like designing a freeway for rush hour traffic. What's the highest peak number of cars that's going to be trying to drive down this freeway? Or if you're doing a water supply system, what's the peak flow of water that people are going to be demanding when everyone's showering and everyone's washing their cars and all that? So like with any utility type of system, that's going to be key. Now, the key thing about all electric neighborhoods is because these end uses are A, intermittent, and B, seasonal, they do not have a significantly higher peak than when you compare it to a mixed fuel development. So this graph here at the bottom is looking at the transformer level, so a neighborhood scale, looking at the peak demand over the course of the year of blue is an all electric neighborhood with solar, which new homes all are required by code to have solar on them. And then the red is a mixed fuel neighborhood where it's traditional, gas furnace, gas water heater, gas stove, etc. And you'll notice that, yes, there's clearly more use in the blue. but that usage is kind of spread out over the course of the year. You notice that the red really spike in their electricity peak usage over the course of the summer months, maybe like that's probably June to September, right? That you're seeing that increase due primarily to air conditioning. Well, what happens with an all electric home is, yeah, you have some winter peaking because in addition to the standard cooling load that you might have during the summer, you're also going to have a similar load like that during peak winter heating conditions. But typically in our climate zones, that peak winter heating doesn't exceed that peak summer. So you've already built out the grid to accommodate that kind of a load. The other thing is that things like water heating and cooking are intermittent. They're not on all the time. They kind of cycle on and off as you need them. I mean, we maybe use our stoves somewhere between 30 minutes to an hour a day in total. Um, and things like a water heaters, when it's running in heat pump mode, that compressor is similarly sized to, say, your refrigerator. And you don't ever think about the grid impacts of having a second refrigerator in your garage, right? It's just a plug-in appliance. It's kind of 120 volt. So these are intermittent loads. They're kind of don't necessarily coincide with what the traditional peak is. So we find that from a peak load standpoint, um, there will definitely be some impacts from, you know, some end uses like, food service electrification at the commercial scale will have some localized impacts. Transportation electrification at various, along the transit corridors and the goods movement corridors, definitely going to be some impacts there that we're planning for. But in terms of residential scale electrification, really not a tremendous impact in our climate zones for the grid infrastructure. Then the question comes up, well, shouldn't I keep multiple fuels in case there's a power outage? If I have all my eggs in the basket of electric, what happens when the power goes out? So a couple of notes. First thing is that the utilities have made tremendous progress, particularly in the new reality that we live in, understanding the greater incidence of wildfire risk, to reduce the frequency and duration of outages. Significant investments have been made in what we call grid hardening, which is making improvements to the resilience of the grid through covered conductor, through non-combustible poles, through fast-acting fuses that, uh-oh, is my battery not charging for some reason? Can you still hear me? Just give me a,
I can hear you. We can hear you.
oh. Mark, can you hear
I can hear
me?
you. Yeah. I don't know if you can hear me, but yes, I can hear you. Oh,
Sorry
wait,
about
I
that.
know I lost you. Hold on. Speak again, please.
Can you hear me now?
It's a little faint, but I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, my dock went a little wacky and it wasn't charging my laptop and it was about to die, so I had to change the port. Can you hear me though?
I got you now. Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. I think everyone else should be able to as well.
Okay. Sorry for that. Let me just reinitiate the screen share. Can you see
Yes,
the share? Okay.
I can see it as well.
Oops. Let me do slideshow from current slide. This will look really great on the recording, I'm sure.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll get our crack editors on it.
Okay. From current slide.
Live TV, folks.
All right. We're back in business?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Sorry about that, but yeah. So I was talking about grid hardening, I believe, when we when we went to the test pattern. But yeah, basically, there's a lot being done. And in SCE territory, you know, we maintain stats of how often outages occur. And of course, it varies from customer to customer and region to region, and depending on whether you have, you know, maintenance happening or what have you. But on average, a customer experiences about one outage a year for a duration of about 2 hours. Some obviously experience more than that because it is an average. I know I myself had about 3 outages this year of about, you know, 4 to 6 hours each, but that's because they were doing infrastructure improvements in our area. And the reality is you can never have 100% uptime because you do, for safety reasons, simply need to, you know, turn off certain areas of the grid or shut off certain areas when you're replacing pieces of it or maintaining pieces of it. However, the efforts are made to minimize that as much as possible and be sensitive to the impacts it has to customers. In terms of, you know, the grid supply and how that may impact grid stability, the real star of recent years in terms of helping to stabilize the grid supply is the deployment of grid side batteries. This year, on April 30th, we crested 7 gigawatts of power supplied to the grid in California from batteries for the first time. And just 2 weeks prior to that was the first time ever that those batteries had peaked at 6 gigawatts. And at that time, there was a 2 hour period when that happened, when the battery storage was the predominant source of supply on the grid, providing more electricity to the grid than all of the natural gas power plants in California that were operational during that period. So that meant that even though the sun was down, the sun was not shining, but solar was the predominant source of energy being supplied to the grid for that 2 hour period. And I believe a couple weeks ago, we just crested 8 gigawatts supplied for the first time. So this is continually, like, it's an exponential increase. And that buffer that the batteries provide to be able to take some of that abundant solar and shift it to the evening hours has really been game changing. It brought us through the recent heat wave that we had in June and July. There's a 3 week period of a heat wave. We didn't have to have any flex alerts, which we historically had. No risk of rolling blackouts. It's really helping to kind of even that out and provide the buffer that gives us that grid stability. So real star there. And to give you a sense of how much 7 gigawatts is, that's like 3.5 Diablo Canyon nuclear power plants worth of output. So it's no small amount at all. It's like multiple power plants worth of energy that we're storing from excess production during the day and shifting into the evening hours. The energy code now for new construction currently requires solar on all homes and commercial and multifamily buildings as well. Commercial and multifamily are required to install battery, and single family homes are required to put in infrastructure to support future battery adoption, which includes a critical loads panel and space for a battery. The nice thing about those systems together is that they can provide that resiliency where you can utilize that home energy storage system. In the event that you do have an outage, you can draw off of that battery and maintain basic services, even if there is a disruption. And I had mentioned earlier the potential for electric vehicles to provide power in a power disruption situation. You know, a Ford F-150, as an example, has a fairly large battery in its long range version. It's equivalent to something like 9 Tesla Powerwalls worth of energy. I talked with a contractor who had one of these vehicles. They had an outage in his neighborhood. He ran extension cords to 2 houses, refrigerators, freezers. His neighbor had an exotic fish aquarium. They had to keep all the video game systems going so that the kids didn't think the world was ending. They still had access to their internet and their online video game systems. But basically, after about 6 hours, his battery was only down 5% with all that load drawing off of the vehicle. So there's a lot of potential as these get more and more building integrated to be a resiliency asset. And then the final thing I'd leave you with on this point is that nearly all modern gas appliances require electricity to operate. Your furnace is not going to be able to blow air throughout the house if the fan blower motor doesn't have power to it. Cooking shouldn't be done without proper ventilation and your range hood working any more than you would take a propane grill and roll it into your kitchen and cook on that. And similarly, stoves and furnaces and water heaters generally require electronic ignition and or power exhaust, all of which require electricity to operate. So in an outage, arguably a tank type heat pump water heater provides you more resilience because you do have that 50, 60, 80 gallons worth of hot water sitting there that you can draw off of even if the power's out. Okay, so a little bit about costs, cost of construction, operating costs, and some of the incentive programs. The New Buildings Institute did a cost study for the Building Decarbonization Code, looking at measures similar to what we have in the Title 24, showed that when you build all electric, you save between $7,500 to $8,200. That's primarily from the elimination of the gas line infrastructure within the building. So eliminating all those pipes and fittings and connections in that entire gas system, all the flues, the combustion vents, all of that. It represents a savings when you go down to just having to build one utility into your building. Those numbers were before California had adopted its electric readiness provisions. So that had provided a penalty for the additional electrical circuits and receptacles and panel sizing that now is baked in that you're doing whether you do mixed fuel or not in California. So those savings are even potentially greater. A study done by E3, a energy consultancy, in 2019 compared the capital cost of appliances and found that in nearly all climate zones, with one of them, San Francisco, a mild climate zone, low-rise multifamily being a bit of a push, but that there were savings with building electric in all of those locations. In terms of operational cost, Peninsula Clean Energy did a study looking at electric retrofits and found that there were bill savings across the studied properties, although even though their energy use went down by 60% relative to the mixed fuel building in terms of the total site energy use, there was limited bill savings, maybe in the order of magnitude $25, $30, something like that. So there were still savings, but not proportional to the amount of energy savings because of the higher cost of electricity. Some recent modeled savings, taking into account some of the new solar tariffs, saw basically mixed fuel versus electric being close to a wash, maybe a slight increase in electric in Edison territory, depending on which rate you're on and what your operating parameters are. But then once you factor in PV, which again is required on all new construction, those costs, operational costs, are halved or more, and that the battery further reduces costs significantly because it allows you to move your usage that you're pulling from the grid outside of that expensive 4 to 9 p.m. peak, when energy can be 2 and 3 times as expensive as using that energy off peak. So battery and solar together really make the economics in all electric construction look extremely attractive. And when you're looking at retrofits, that can be a lot trickier because you have that gas infrastructure already in place. So are you going to reuse it, or are you going to abandon it? You don't kind of get the benefit of cost savings of avoiding that system. There are systems approaches you can take to avoid expensive electric service upgrades. One is load sharing devices, where you might have the dryer and the EV charger, or the dryer and the water heater on the same circuit using a shared device that sets a priority. And when one of those is operating, it pauses the other. So maybe while you're drying clothes, your car charger stops charging. When the load is done, it resumes charging, that kind of thing. There are 120 volt options for heat pump water heaters. They can take longer to refill with hot water, but they would operate in heat pump only mode. And for certain applications where maybe it's a lower demand use, that could be perfectly appropriate. Heat pump condensing washer and dryer can operate on a 120 volt outlet and wouldn't necessarily require a new circuit. Improving your envelope efficiency can help reduce your needed HVAC size, which can reduce the size you need for your compressor, which can reduce the need for potential upgrades. Meter collars are an option. It's an additional add-on between your meter and your electric panel that can allow a PV or an electric vehicle to plug in directly. A lower level EV charger can help reduce that, so you don't necessarily have to go for the 60 amp model. Maybe a 30 amp will meet your daily needs and could reduce the strain on the budget you have for your electric panel. The watt diet calculator, if you Google that, and we can provide this material with an active link, but that's a really useful Excel tool that can help you estimate what your loads would be and can you fit electrification on an existing 100 amp panel. So where to go to get some more information? Localenergycodes.com has a lot of great resources around this. They support REACH codes, which are ordinances that local jurisdictions may adopt to support going above and beyond the code, and they look very often at electrification. So a lot of these resources, such as this is where you can find links to that watt diet calculator, as well as some other resources that'll help there, some guidebooks and other really helpful decarbonization resources. And then they also have an incentives tab on that site where you can find a lot of links to things like the Switch is On, which helps you navigate qualified contractors for rebate programs, and the Tech Clean California program, which provides support for incentives through the state for heat pumps. And yeah, incentives can be in the tens of thousands if you include tax credits through the Inflation Reduction Act, and they're stackable. So what are some of the things that make all electric homes lower cost? A, eliminating the need to run gas infrastructure. That B, heat pumps are inherently more efficient. That solar systems can power electric homes for much of the day. Or D, all of the above. What are we thinking? Any one of those things, all of those? We're seeing a lot of all of the above. I appreciate that. Yes, indeed, it is all of the above. So we'll close out with a quick look at a analysis that was done looking at cost-effective compliance options for a standard 1,400 square foot home, in this case, climate zone 12, which was the Sacramento area. But basically, because heat pumps are required prescriptively, if you go with gas, it can be a much more expensive proposition to have to make up for that in the metrics. You can see that to make a compliant mixed fuel option that has gas for water heating and space heating, the project would need to increase the wall insulation. In this case, it's R21 cavity insulation plus an R5 continuous insulation. You would have to do quality installation inspection, which requires you to bring out a HERS rater to do a special inspection and make sure that that insulation was installed properly. A battery system, high efficiency furnace with a high efficiency split air conditioning, and increased insulation for the ducts in the attic. Whereas if you compare that to the all electric option, standard insulation, no QII required, no battery storage system needed, at least not for compliance. And then kind of standard efficiency appliances are enough with that kind of all electric design to get you to compliance. So the bottom line here is that you can still do mixed fuel, but because you have to make up for the energy performance in the energy model on the TDV source metric, which looks at greenhouse gas impacts, in order to get that into compliance, it requires some additional efficiency measures that could cost your project more. All right, So one more check your understanding question, and that is the energy code now favors all electric design over gas. What does it require to build with gas today? That homes must be built all electric ready, that gas systems require flues and vent combustion gases, that additional feature upgrades would be needed for a mixed fuel design to meet and comply with Title 24, or all of the above. See what's coming in the chat. What do folks think? Seeing mostly D's, mostly all of the above, and that is correct. Very good. So in our kind of closing minutes here, does anybody have any specific questions? I do see
Dave,
one here.
you have
Yeah.
that? Do you have Jorge's?
The would you say that
Yes.
convincing a point? Yeah. To a client or homeowner that in the future and after 2030, when the equipment fails, there will be no fossil fuel replacement. They will need to do the transition then. So it's a good point. The thing is, yes, you could put these things in today, but you want to be ready for when that's what's available on the market, or when that's not a specialty item, or you have to drive under the cover of darkness to go across state lines and find the equipment elsewhere, kind of thing. But yes, planning ahead. And that's something that should come up, particularly in renovation projects, is even if you're not doing this now, you need to look at what's going to be the most cost-effective long-term strategy to accommodate future electrification without kind of painful, expensive upgrades in the future. When it gets most expensive is when you wait until equipment failure to have to not just change out the equipment and find a pro to do that, but then also potentially put in the infrastructure needed to support a different type of equipment. If you've already done the work of putting in the infrastructure to support it proactively, that's going to be a much less expensive emergency upgrade in the future. Let's see here. There's a question. New commercial projects energy code states the building will need to be solar ready. Does a new commercial project need to have PV system? So yeah, the 2022 standards changed from solar ready to solar required for most commercial projects. Not all. There are some exceptions. And if you go to we have on Energy Code ACE a PV and battery fact sheet for both residential and for commercial, and it lays out all the tables, all the sizing factors, the two different formulas that you would need to consider when sizing a commercial PV and or battery system. And there are potential trade-offs that you can do again through the energy model, but you're trading certain features like in significantly increased equipment efficiencies and or envelope improvements in order to get rid of features like a required battery. Presentation will provide a PDF to Mark to help distribute afterwards. Electric ready means only the wiring right, not the actual receptacle near the appliance. No, it does mean the receptacle too. And in the case of things like water heaters, it means having a clear space that tank could go into in the future. Yeah, I definitely encourage you to download the fact sheet because it outlines what the specific size and type of the receptacle is, the labeling, right? So you have to label that it's a future receptacle and what it's for. Yeah. Let's see here. Okay. And I think that's pretty much it. I know we're at time. I just have a couple of closing things just in terms of next steps. So definitely we have other code breakers. We've got a couple of them coming up. We got the embodied carbon one and the PV and battery, which the PV and battery might help to address some of the questions that came up here. So definitely sign up for that code breaker when we bring it. Some of the virtual classes that are relevant to architects, single family standards for architects and designers, non-residential standards for architects and designers. These are fundamental classes for you and your staff to take. So definitely go online and look at when the next offerings of those are going to be. Download the electric readiness and the designing single family homes to run on clean energy fact sheets. Those relate back to the topics we talked about today and are really useful, as well as all the other fact sheets I mentioned. by all means, go and set up an account on energycodeace.com. Once you are in there with a profile, you say you're an architect or designer, and it'll send you information and upcoming classes specifically of interest to you and your role as a design professional. And then that is my contact information as well as my PG&E counterpart to close it out. I appreciate everyone's time and attention today. And yeah, if you have follow-up questions, you got my contact info there. Always happy to talk about electrification and decarbonization. So
Thank you very
thank
much.
you
I
so much.
appreciate it. I'm just going to close with I'll be sending a thank you note to everyone. You will receive one AIA CES Learning Unit, HSW, that has been approved, and we'll be sending you a certificate for 1 hour towards ZN CD portion of the California license renewal. Thank you guys very much. Have a very safe and happy long weekend. I'm sure well deserved for everyone. And we'll see you at the next seminar. Take care.